Can't miss a word of it. I'm Bobby Fitch Howman. I grew up here in Guilford. I am the master / president of Broad Brook Grange. I actually joined when I was 14, so we won't tell you how many years ago, but it was a long time ago. And then I wasn't active for a while I toured the world and everything, and then I came back after my dad died. So this is my community. I'm very proud that you are all here, that this is just a magnificent community to live in, and I hope you agree. I have to thank the Guilford Historical Society because we didn't really know about this until we got a call saying, hey, how would you like to co-sponsor this? And if you know anything about the Grange, which is actually a national organization, farmers and agriculture were our main focus. But that doesn't mean you have to be a farmer to be a part of it. So if any of you want to rush out and join, we have forms in the back. The National Grange actually started in 1867, which means right after the Civil War. And Little Guilford actually had its own Grange form 7 years after that. So last year we celebrated 150 years. We're very excited about just this whole idea of agriculture because even though we may not have as many farmers, we do lead. We're actually in the top 10 of the states that have organic farming operations. So farming, as Roger will talk to you tonight, has changed a lot. And I know that farmers have taught other farmers. So some of the practices now used have actually been passed from the organic farmers to the conventional, for which I am very thankful. My father never raised corn for cows. And I had to tell our farmer, who I don't farm anymore. I'm an old lady, though I'd love to, I can't. We have a farm family who does farm our land to keep it open. I have it in current use, and it's very vital to me. At one point I thought, oh, we'll just build the new house on the land. I have 94 acres, but it's in current use, all but 3 acres, and that's the home site. So no, I'm trying to preserve it for the animals. I joke that the animals run my land. I just pay the taxes. And you never know what you're going to see. And a lot of people now have trail cams on their land. I've had hunters ask, can they put theirs on my land? And to date, I've said no. I don't want them to be tracking my wildlife because they're mine. So I don't mind. There's some hunting you have to do to cull the herds, and I understand that philosophically. And so I give my permission when I can. I've had people who've actually lost that privilege for what they've done, shooting from the road into the field and doing other things. Scalping a young deer that wasn't even old enough to be gotten, so then the coyotes carried everything away except for what this this hunter dragged out. So I'm not anti-hunting, but I am pro-agriculture, and you will find that this Grange still tries to cater to the farming element. So we're just honored that we're able to help sponsor this, and looking forward to what Roger's going to share with us. Okay?
Thank you, Bobby. And my name is Chuck Collins. I live at the Springs Farm, and I'm part of the Guilford Historical Society. So this is a joint event with the Broad Brook Grange, Local 151, and the Guilford Historical Society, of which there are a number of trustees here. Let's see the trustees raise their hands here. So you want to learn more about the Guilford Historical Society. And we have a museum just down the road, and we're open now every Saturday from 9 to 12. Come by and see the museum. And if you're lucky, we'll take you across the street to the meeting house that we have stewarded and brought back and had repainted, and it's in beautiful condition. So come check out the Guilford Historical Society on Saturday mornings. And I want to also, in addition to thanking Bobby and the members of the Grange, and who are Grange members in the room? All right, so there's some of our Grange members. There's a little overlap there, which is good. So, and I also want to thank Jan Van Owen from Brattleboro Community TV, who is recording this so that we can have it as part of our historical record here, because we're going to invite a couple local farmers up to be part of the program as well. But let me tell you what's going to happen. And I should also thank Ann Zimmerman from Everyone's Books. She brought copies of the book, and I think we could, to purchase and take home and get Roger to inscribe it. And maybe there's a farmer or somebody turning the soil in your family who couldn't be here tonight but might like this book. And so you could bring it to them and gift it to them and have Roger sign it to them. So that's something we can do after the program. But we're going to have Roger speak about his book, and then I'm going to invite a couple of local people who are turning the soil. David Franklin, Meggie Stoltzman from the Hermit Thrush Homestead, Phil Cutting from the Cutting Farm, and Harry Evans from the Evans Farm. So the four of them, and these are not people who we had to kind of lean on them a little bit to come out, and they're busy. It's been a rainy season. We're kind of behind, in terms of getting stuff done, but they graciously came out to share any reflections. And then we'll turn back to Roger and just have an open question and answer. And then please don't leave early, because we are going to have a special celebration downstairs. We have drinks, and we are going to celebrate the 100th birthday of the Cutting Farm, which turned 100 years old in May. And some members of the Cutting family are here. We have a little cake, and we'll have a little celebration. So, but let me introduce Roger. Some of you know Roger. He was a Vermont Secretary of Agriculture. It's just one of his many roles that he's played in our region and community. He grew up on a hilltop farm in Brookline, just outside Townsend there, and Newfane, and a farm that's been in the family since 1794. So we've heard about century farms, and we're talking about moving in the third century here. In addition, he was our Vermont USDA farm representative. He worked for Senator Leahy, and you may know he was the executive director of Grace Cottage. So he's a man of many skills, and he has written a terrific book. And I also like sort of small, manageable books, but this is just packed with history, turning the soil, 250 years of Vermont agriculture. And, if you've came down Sweet Pond Road, you passed Potash Lane. Well, okay, I still have to explain to my kids, well, what's potash? And that was the vibrant export crop of our community at one point. So Roger is going to speak to us about that history. And we're thrilled that he was able to come and be part of this program. So let's give a Guilford welcome to Mr. Roger Allbee.
Thank you so much, Chuck. People say, "Are you 250 years old?" But it's been a passion of mine to do this book, because I find out that in order to appreciate where you are, you have to understand where you came from. And the book is about that. When I did the Ag Secretary thing in Montpelier, the Ag Agency building is on State Street, and it's the old National Life building. And in the building, there's some old big safes, the huge safes, bank safes. I used to say sometimes I wanted to lock people in them, but I didn't. We had a great staff, actually. But in those safes, there were the old yearbooks of agriculture going way back. And sometimes in the evening, I would spend my time in the safe because my wife wasn't there sometimes. And what I found out in reading those books is that many of the things that some of the old farmers went through and the changes in agriculture that took place, they were always reinventing themselves, those who could survive. They were always reinventing themselves to survive. And that book is about that. It's about the changes that have taken place from the beginning when the flush of people moved to Vermont after the French and Indian War. They came up here. Young Benny Wentworth, the governor of New Hampshire, got himself appointed governor, and he came up with a scheme to make money by selling lots, building towns in what became Vermont. And many of the early settlers came up here and bought those lots like my ancestors. In their case, in his case, it was on Newfane Hill in Newfane. And they cleared the land, and the first land, of course, they cleared was to make potash. And potash was in great demand by the English because they had depleted a lot of their hardwood resources in England, and they needed it to make candles and wax and clean wool and other enterprises. They actually had people going around teaching farmers how to make potash. You make it, if any of you are lumbermen, by cutting hardwood trees and burning the trees and the ashes, and you put water through it, and you get the lye, and you cook the lye in the kettle and get the chip off what remains, and they got $5 for every 100 pounds. Can you imagine how many logs it took to do that? $5 for 100 pounds. In many farms, that's how they paid for the land, was by doing that enterprise. But that actually didn't last very long, because they soon found that events in other parts of the world could affect their economics. And what happened very clearly and quickly was that there was a scientist that found out there's another way to make potash. And they did it with seawater. And so the bottom fell out very quickly of making potash. But from the beginning, transportation became very important. And in the late 1700s, if you were an able-bodied man in Vermont, you had to do at least 2 or 3 days of working on roads in your town. It was required. So transportation became very important. And the first means of transportation, of course, were turnpikes. The road from Brattleboro to Bennington was a turnpike, and turnpikes were scattered throughout the state of Vermont in the beginning. And it's funny, if you read the history, some of these turnpikes, people got around them, especially if you're farmers, you were excused from paying the toll. But there was also other ways to get around it, side roads, so they didn't last economically very long. And many of them became state roads after that. But towns were growing very quickly. And in the beginning, in northern Vermont, most of the ag exports went to Quebec or Montreal. In the southern part of the Vermont, they went to Boston or Albany or Troy or that area. And the other major transportation route was Connecticut River. People don't realize the Connecticut River was one of the first major commercial navigation rivers in the United States. And the first canal was in Bells Falls, Vermont. Started in 1792 and became operational in the first part of 1800s. And there was a firm in Brattleboro, Vermont, Northrop, well, I forgot the name, but they actually had a boat. The boats could carry about 30 tons. They were flat bottomed. And the boat, they had a processing facility on the island in Brattleboro. Any of you old enough to know the island? I know you aren't, but my mother did. She was born in Brattleboro in 1916. They had a processing facility for meat there, and they shipped the meat and processed stuff they made, went all the way to the West Indies, and the boats could go all the way up to Wells River, Vermont. It took 3 days to get down to Long Island Sound, going through the series of canals, and 25 days to get back, apparently. So it was quite a enterprise. But transportation was very, very critical to the early process. The Champlain Canal, of course, came in a little later, and the Erie Canal too. And Erie Canal, which was built by DeWitt Clinton, 40 feet wide, 4 feet deep, all the way from Rome, New York to one of the Great Lakes, was considered to be one of the wonders of the world, and it reduced the transportation. And by the way, Jefferson, who was president then, didn't want it built. He said there must be something wrong in that mind of Clinton to want to build that. But it reduced transportation cost. Used to cost $100 a ton to bring wheat from the west. Once it was completed, it was $10 a ton. So it really influenced agriculture in the Northeast and changed a world. New York City became the largest port in the United States, and immigration from the world started moving westward with that happening. But once the things started to change, Vermont became known for a place that merino sheep could thrive. And you wonder, how could that happen? Well, it happened because there were people in very influential places that decided that they wanted to bring merino sheep to the United States. The Spanish at the time didn't want their sheep to go anywhere in the world. They were prized. And there were two people who actually were very instrumental in bringing merinos to not only Vermont, but to New England. One was a Colonel Humphreys, who had been aide-de-camp to General George Washington. And he was able to bring about 75 to the United States. And he made a place called Humphreyville, Connecticut, which today is Seymour, Connecticut. And it was one of the first large processing facilities for wool in the United States. But he eventually, a guy named William Jarvis, who also was counselor to Portugal, and he, when Napoleon invaded Spain, he used his, leverage to convince them to sell him about 15,000 or more merino sheep. And he decided to live in Wethersfield, Vermont. And you'd say, all places, Wethersfield, Vermont? Why would he do that? He could have chosen Brookline. But he chose Wethersfield, Vermont, and it was because he had an uncle and cousin in Claremont, New Hampshire. And they said, there's a place across the river you can buy. And he became like the Ben and Jerry's of the merino sheep industry. He went around the country. He was very well connected in Washington, D.C., and the merino sheep industry took off because after the War of 1812, of course, they didn't want imports from the United Kingdom, and they put tariffs on the importation of wool. And so the merino sheep really became very, very successful. And any of you have sheep? You know they eat very closely to the ground. And our land was very good for growing grass. So the merino sheep took off, and by 1840, I think we had 300,000 people in the state and 1.6 million merino sheep. So when people say you had more cows than men, well, you had more sheep than people. But it took off, and it was very successful until something happened. The South didn't like the tariffs. Why would the South not like the tariffs? Well, they were selling wool to England. Cotton to England. And they didn't want to lose that market. And so very quickly the tariff rate was reduced significantly. And overnight, half the merino sheep were slaughtered in Vermont about 1940. It continued during the Civil War because of why? Clothes, uniforms. People needed uniforms. And after that, it continued because of Vermont being known for its merino sheep, but it was breeding stock. We were selling breeding stock all over the world, even to Australia and New Zealand. But as that declined and other states could produce sheep cheaper than we could, In the West, they could produce a head of sheep for about 50 to 75 cents a head. It cost us $100.50 to do $2 a head to do in Vermont. So the economics didn't work out. So gradually, the dairy industry moved in. People always kept some cows, but they were mixed breed. They didn't really have any pedigree to speak of. But there was a beginning to move to butter and cheese production, and that moved fairly quickly. And St. Albans quickly became the butter capital of the world. They had 60 separators in St. Albans, and they could make 25,000 pounds of butter a day when they were producing at maximum capacity. But most of that, before that, butter was made in the house by the person in the house. And there's a funny story in some of these old ag books that I read about that. And they said, there's 4 or 5 things you need to make good butter. And the first is good water, good cream, good salt, a good container, and a good woman. And the last is the most important to making good butter. I think you would all agree to that. But the sheep period disappeared pretty quickly, and butter started to take over that. In the late 1800s, however, that started to be challenged because Napoleon III, I think it was, decided that they needed some fat of some nature for their population and for the troops. So he enticed the scientists to come up with a way to make a product called margarine. Margarine. And it quickly found its way to the United States. And in fact, if you read, I think it's Mark Twain in Life on the Mississippi talks about it. And basically, margarine was meant to take over butter production in the United States. And in the beginning, it was made by animal renderings, fat, slaughterhouse stuff. And quickly, states in the dairy industry, which were very prominent then, decided they needed to find a way to stop margarine production. In Vermont and 5 other states said, well, we got a way to stop it. We're going to make sure that it's colored pink when it's sold. It's colored pink. And the case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, well, you're trying to be pretty crafty. We understand that, but you can't do that because of the Commerce Clause under the Constitution. And the Commerce Clause says that one state cannot interfere with trade with another state unless it's a human health issue. And we don't see that as a human health issue. So they came up with another technique, and they said, well, we're going to allow it to be sold, but it's going to be sold natural color, white. Well, the margarine industry said, well, we've got a way to get around that. And some of you may be old enough to remember the squeeze bags, yellow squeeze bags, that when they sold the margarine and you squeezed it. And that's how they tried to get around that. And they did, but eventually butter took over, and now butter is much more popular than margarine. And it's a different technique even for margarine today for making it. So the war years have always been profitable for agriculture, victory gardens and other things that were done during those years. But there were 3 things that happened in 1862, which I believe changed the course of agriculture in the United States and even continue today. One was the Land Grant Act. How many of you went to a land grant college like UVM and Penn State, Cornell, Ohio State, Rutgers? Yep, Land Grant Act. And that was put in by Justin Morrill, who then was the senator from Vermont. Wasn't his idea, actually, but that's how things work. Actually, at one time, George Washington wanted to create a ag college like the military colleges in the United States. But the reason it passed was because the Southern senators and congressional delegation decided to leave Congress because of the Civil War, so it passed. The other thing that changed it was the Homestead Act. And if you were a person or a veteran of the Civil War, you could get 160 acres. And if you improved it over 5 years, you would be able to keep that land. And that Homestead Act actually continued until 1986 in Alaska. But you could get 160 acres of land. And over the time, I think there was 270 million acres of land that went to the Homestead Act. 10% of the land in the United States was settled by homesteaders due to that act. And the other was the Intercontinental Railroad Act. That they drove that golden spike in Utah to connect the East Coast and West Coast railroads, and made it very cheaper and quicker from that to move products quickly from the East and the West Coast. You could go as a passenger to California in 3 days by train, where before that it would take several weeks or months to do it. So it changed the whole economics of agriculture in the United States. And that was all done by selling Native American land. Native American land that happened. So those were things that really changed what I think was part of agriculture that continues to some extent today. I made some notes, so excuse me as I try to figure out where I am on. But in 1895, the State Board of Agriculture became very aggressive in terms of what to do with hilltop farms in Vermont. Vermont was losing hilltop farms even before the Civil War. People were moving westward expansion. And Vermont was trying to figure out what to do with them. Many of them were disappearing. And so the Board of Agriculture started advertising, even on trains, Vermont, fertile farms and summer homes across the state. Now, if you're from Guilford, you want to say, is there a farm in here? And yes, there is. 1,000 acres. No, 100 and some odd acres. 800 maple trees for sale. I think it was $1,500, 1895. You can look at it afterwards. But that was to try to get rid of hilltop farms in Vermont, all throughout Vermont. Vermont very quickly became noted, and this was what part of it for tourism. They wanted to make Vermont a tourism mecca, and this was part of it, advertising on trains and other things. And very quickly, Vermont became known as a scenic wonderland. In fact, Vermont started the first publicity office for a state in the country in 1911. In the state of Vermont, to advertise a state. So, but you have to go backwards a little bit. And you talked in the beginning about the Grange in the late 1800s. The Grange was a very powerful organization, very powerful. And it was organized because of the railroads were charging high rates. Farmers were not getting good returns from the buyers for their product. Communities were disappearing. The sense of community spirit had disappeared, and the Grange was to bring people back together, to focus on farm issues, to build cooperatives, to help farmers in terms of pricing, to take on the railroads. Funny little story, if I might. I had a friend when I worked at, person I knew when I worked at Montpelier who was a real activist, and she tried to join the local Grange, and they said she was too much of an activist. And I said to him, I said, boy, they don't know their history. They took on the United States back in the 1800s. They took on the United States. They took on the economics, because that was the Gilded Age, where wealth was owned by a very few, and farmers were not getting very good returns. So the Grange movement really changed things, but where you had after that coming together was what I call the cooperative movement. You had the Antitrust Act, the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Clay Antitrust Act, and Capra-Volstead, which is what considered to be the gold standard of the cooperative movement even today, where farmers can jointly sell products and not be charged with antitrust. They can price together as well. That still exists, but that came out of that period of the 1900s. There were some changes that really took place in Vermont in 1927. There was a major flood in 1927 of Vermont, and it wiped everything out. The lieutenant governor died in the flood. My wife's grandfather, who was a prominent veterinarian up in Barre, talked about walking back from Burlington to Barre, Vermont, and he said, "I don't think the state will ever recover." Took everything out. And it did. People got together. They make things work. But out of that came the Country Life Commission in 1932, which issued a report on what needed to be done to the future in terms of Vermont. And it really was a Bible for several years of what were the things that could make Vermont prosperous again. They said the state should take over the hilltops. They were so important. That we should be in advertising on the roadway. That we shouldn't have pollution of water and streams. That farmers should balance supply and demand of milk and work together on efficient marketing with co-ops. That maple was key to Vermont's soul from the beginning and continues to be. And that apples were very important too. And the diversification of the farm were extremely important. We did have diversified operations. And that Vermont had a future if they understood that their best future was local markets and regional markets and not competing with the West in terms of products. But then this New Deal came about, President Roosevelt. And Vermont had always been a Republican state, even after the Whig Party. As you might imagine, a progressive Republican state, by the way. And as you might imagine, there wasn't much sentiment for parts of the New Deal, especially those that took control away from the state. But there was some sentiment for that provide money to the state, so to speak. So a lot of things came out of the New Deal and the Roosevelt administration. One thing was the Civilian Conservation Corps. Some of the state parks that we have today came about because of the CCC, as well as the skiing industry. Some people don't remember or might remember there was a state forester named Perry Merrill, who basically was instrumental in helping to develop the ski industry in Vermont, which is why we have tourism in many cases. Also, the Dust Bowl came about during that period of time. In fact, there's a story about how in D.C. the president had dust coming in from the west when they encouraged the development of the west. Some of the plains that were encouraged to be developed, they should never have been developed. The soil wasn't meant to be turned over, but they were having immigrants coming in from Russia and Germany and other places, and the railroads were selling them land as well as other people, and that land was turned over, and the Dust Bowl resulted. As a result of that, you had the Soil Conservation Service developed, as well as the local conservation district. Harry, are you here? Harry Evans, you were part of the local conservation district that came about after 1933-35 period. Still exists, I believe, in this country. The other thing that wasn't too popular, however, was that there was an attempt to, by what was called the Resettlement Administration, to take over hilltop farms. The federal government wanted to take over, how many acres did I figure? 20,000 acres of marginal land and 50% of the land area of the state for state park and forestry. And George Aiken, some of us remember George Aiken quite well. George Aiken was put in charge of the commission to look at that. And Aiken decided that it wasn't a good fit. I think his farm may have been in that category, but I don't know. But anyhow, the federal government wanted to retain the mineral rights, and Aiken said that's not fair game, and so that was did not happen. The other thing was the Green Mountain Parkway. Any of you remember the Green Mountain Parkway? Green Mountain Parkway was proposed actually to go up the western side of the state by Lake Champlain, all the way up. It was supposed to be like the Blue Ridge Parkway, and it was going to be all the way up to Canada. And the state was going to get $18 million in funds to do it. And the legislature went back and forth on that, couldn't decide. So they put it out to a referendum to the public. Now, you know, in Vermont, we're not a referendum state. It's not binding. But they put it out to a referendum. I think it lost by 12,000 votes, something like that. And so it never was built, but it was a very contentious issue during the time that was put forward. The other thing that happened then, of course, which we all took advantage of, was rural electric. Because the electric companies, the private electric companies, didn't want to build lines to rural America because it was too expensive. There was no return. So rural electric was proposed, rural electric administration, and lines were brought into rural town. I remember my mother, late mother, talking about it. I asked her once, I said, do you remember when you got electric power? She said, yes, it was 1938. And your dad was farming with his dad, and they brought one line into our house. And we had a 15-watt light bulb. And I said, your dad, boy, that's awfully bright. We won't need anything brighter than that. and they were afraid to put electricity in the barn in the beginning because they thought it would start a fire, even though they had oil lamps and gas lamps and all that. So things changed. And the other, of course, was the rural telephone. Some of us grew up with party lines, right? We tell the story that we had a party line and everyone was listening in all the time. And I used to say that probably somebody in town would know that somebody was pregnant before the husband did. But it was party line, and it was wonderful in many ways. But after the New Deal changed things too. The Eisenhower administration, of course, decided on the interstate highway. I think it came through Brattleboro, Guilford about 1960. And I remember when it was being developed and all that, because you had the King's Highway before that. But that was a big deal. You say, why was that able to be done and yet the Green Mountain Parkway wasn't? Well, think of it. The nuclear age, worries about nuclear bombs, worries about what was happening, Russia, the Cold War. They wanted to get people out of the cities in case there was a disaster. So there really wasn't too much opposition. But there was a farmer up in Ascutney, Vermont, where they put you probably have read about it, it's quite popular, who was putting the road through his farm, and he said, I'm not going to let it happen. They had eminent domain. Of course, they took the land. He said, it's not going to happen. And that night, he killed himself and burned his farm and house. So it never did happen. So there was a lot of things that were changed as a result of that happening. Of course, the thing, if you were a dairy farmer, you saw happened, of course, was going from milk cans to bulk tanks. And I remember that. My grandfather was farming. We had the milk cans, and I remember seeing the milk truck driver pulling up and pulling the cans out of the cold water tank and leaving some cans behind and all that. And then when they came in with bulk tanks, that changed things in Vermont immensely. I know the Farm Bureau was very instrumental then. Keith Wallace, you remember Keith Wallace, was hard farmer from Waterbury, was head of the Farm Bureau, and they did a study with UVM, and they indicated that to make it economic, you had to have 28 cows or more. And the majority of farms in Vermont at that time had 18 or less cows. 18 or less. So by 1970, 3/4 of Vermont's dairy farms were out of operation. Just from that. And it wasn't the state that required that. It was the handlers. The state was not requiring it. It was the handlers. The other thing that happened, of course, was grocery chains and refrigeration. That really changed things. The bottling of milk and selling of bottled milk was very popular, even Thomas Dairy in Brattleboro and others before that. Cannoli Farm in Newfane. But when refrigeration came in, and that changed things immensely, especially when milk could be packaged in cardboard and plastic and all that. And people had 2 jobs and they no longer needed to bake at home or buy bottled milk. They go to the grocery store after work. And in the automobile after World War II. Of course, during World War II, the automobile wasn't produced. It was again produced after World War II, and you had the 2 family work people after World War II, by and large. And the other thing was reapportionment in 1965. Before that happened, of course, every town had a legislator that went to Montpelier. My grandfather was one. And in 1965, the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. We need to have representation equally. So Brookline, a town of 100 people, couldn't have the same vote as Burlington, Vermont. Too bad. And the voice of the rural community was lost, by and large. I think in the legislature today, I'm not sure if there's but 1 or 2 farmers that exist today. And of course, back to the land movement of the 60s. If you're in Guilford, you know all about that. You had, the Total Loss Farm and others that were part of that. That really brought back a great deal of interest in local foods. The local food movement really came back with the back of the land movement. Howard Prusak up in Westminster, I think, talks about getting off the train or bus, and others like them became very important. Well, over a long period of time, there's been an attempt to, what I'd say, address ways to keep Vermont farms economic in some way, especially when farm policy since the 1970s has been really get big or get out. The other thing that happened in 1902 was the Reclamation Act, when the federal government decided to sell federal land to open up the arid West to agriculture production. San Joaquin Valley, and those are half of the water from the Colorado River goes to irrigation today. And a lot of that can't be supported long term. So those things really, but there's been a lot of things that have been done. Act 250, when Governor Dean Davis came down to, I think, Mount Snow area, and saw the development taking place on shallow soils, and said, we got to do something about that because we don't have the environmental things in place. And out of that, with extensive hearings, came Act 250 and the protection of prime and statewide soils. That was what the intent of Act 250 was. Prime and statewide soils should be protected. The other thing, of course, was what I'd call current use program, taxation on ag land, to make sure it's not taxed according to its economic development value, but according to its use as ag. And purchase development rights, of course, that have taken place on many farms to keep land in production when people sell the rights to not have that land productive. There's a lot of things that are happening today, which I think give me a little bit of excitement. What I call the renaissance of the past, with new people doing old things with new technology. You're seeing the growth in farmers markets, local foods, even, up until the Temperance Union in 1850 or 1852, Vermont had more distilleries than we had towns. in the state. Absolutely, that's true. And the temperance union said, no, you couldn't sell alcohol or things of that nature. And I said, well, you know what happened then? They said you couldn't do it except for ceremonial purposes in churches. And I said, church attendance must have gone like that. But the temperance union, but today you look at what's happening. We have the growth even in that sector of beers and wines and spirits and CSAs and food connects and farmers markets and those things. But it's still very challenging because of the what I'd say the changes that even taking place today, and that give you a little bit of economics. 11 grocery retailers in the U.S. are responsible for 3/4 of the food trade. Walmart has about 23% of the retail food trade. Albertsons and Kroger's have the other, make up 50%. So it's very controlled. The food trade is very controlled in the United States. 6 companies control seeds and ag chemicals in the world. 4 firms control 85% of beef and pork processing in the United States, and chicken processing too. You saw this when COVID took place. You went to the grocery stores, you saw what happened. And every aspect of the food system is consolidated today. Anyhow, it's interesting. In the year about 2020, National Geographic magazine, the travel magazine, said that Vermont was the number 5 place in the world to visit, and the number 1 place in the U.S. to visit. And they said it was because we had beautiful landscape, quaint villages, and a plan for the future. I remember at the time saying, I like the first 2, not aware of the third. But I think Vermont has gone through many changes, continues to go through changes. We have wonderful people working the land, working hard on the land, doing wonderful things. And somebody said, I quote, if ag were to wither away to memory, Vermont would cease to be anything unique. It would just become a distant suburb of Boston. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. That was terrific. And we're going to have some time to ask questions of Roger, but I wanted to invite 4 people who are in the room just to come up and sit here. Phil, David Franklin, Meggie, and Harry Evans. Come on down. And Meggie, are you here? All right, great. Maggie's working with yeah. But we're, so part of what was exciting about having Roger come was thinking our historical society, maybe we can invite some people who are presently turning the land, doing the work, trying to create livelihoods, some of whom have been doing it generationally, some of whom are new, just to reflect on what Roger said. So we said, you don't have to prepare anything. Let the Spirit move you. But I'm going to turn to Harry first, partly because he had a little more warning than others. And just to see, Harry, if you had any reflections just on what Roger said. And I'm going to, yeah. You all can stand up or we can pass this microphone around.
Thank you. I'm not going to go back quite as far as Roger did. I go back in some of my memories and a little bit before that. But my grandfather and great-grandfather come down from Halifax, next town over, in 1912. They come down to the main farm and house over where my uncle lived is, if you go back down and past the Weathered Hollow Road and just turn the corner, that was where they come to. Well, at that time, that place was, it all burned down. Everything burned down. It was a place where people could stop by and rest their horses and had kind of a tavern or something there. That's what they say. And so then they acquired the property and they built a barn and house on that location. And that's the barn and the house that's there today. My great-grandfather, let's see, he was a town clerk in 2015, and then my grandfather, Charles Evans, was a town clerk's assistant, and then he was a town clerk in, let's see, I think it was I got it written down here somewhere, 28, or 25, 28, thank you. My wife, she kind of remembers me on some of this stuff. I sometimes I have a moment I can't think there. But so he was town clerk there, and I don't know just when they had cows or anything there, but there was room to, the big barn was built like a lot of others in town and around. So you drove in the front to a barn floor, and then you could go through and then right out the back. And they used to have cows on a wooden floor on one side down the barn, and a couple of horse stalls on that side too. And I don't remember much about horses in my time. I do remember when they did have horses. That was when I was quite young. They used to use horses for, in my time, as I remember, it was sugaring. And then I can remember when they used to use the horses to help cultivate the corn. And that was about the extent of them using the horses at that time. That was, let me think now, I don't remember what year that was. I was quite young. But farm work was a lot of, back in them times when I was growing up, was a lot of handwork. Everything was done by hand. The haying and cutting around the edges of fields. Every farmer pretty much did all the roadside along land that he owned. That was something that every farmer pretty much did. And everybody, or a lot of people, and I can remember I used to go with my grandfather, we'd be cutting around the field as they were mowing the hay. We'd cut around the field by hand and so cut it back to the stone wall or fence or whatever, and cut the brush with the scythe and so forth. And so it kept it pretty open. Nowadays, equipment has got a lot bigger and modern, so there's not much of that, as much of that handwork is done now. So that I could see quite a change there. But we had a lot of activities. My father belonged to the Grange, and that was a pretty important activity. The Grange was pretty active, and they had card parties and dances and so forth. And let's see now. There was always quite a lot of activity around the farm. With my grandfather being town clerk, we had good insight of what was happening around town if you wanted to listen. Everybody had stories to tell, whether it was right or wrong. And also another thing on the farm that happened on the farm was down beside the brook, what we call the picnic area. The men's club in town had a big clam bake there every year. Did anybody ever remember going to the clam bake?
Jim had.
that was that. But I wasn't too old. I was not. I can't tell you just how old I was then, but that was one big event. And then another event that happened at the farm was when it was an old home day, when the Guilford people had a old home day get together, which was the start of the Guilford Fair. And that was over on the farm as you went around the corner, and before you got over to where the pond is there, it was over in back of the knoll, Pine Knoll, and that was where we had cow pasture, and the cows kept it pretty well trimmed down, all ready for the Guilford get together. And that went quite a few years until they had a opportunity to come up with some land where they presently are. And I don't know. I could probably think of a lot of other things. My father was a lister in town, so that took a fair amount of time at times. My grandfather was a town clerk, and my Uncle Emery, he was a school director for many, many years. And so everybody had other jobs to do other than just milk the cows and do the farm work. So everybody had a job to do. And I can remember when our milk went by in cans. We had cows down to where we are. My father had cows down there, a few cows down there, and they would milk them and put the milk into milk cans, and then take it over to Emery's, where the main farm there, and he had cows they milked there, and put the milk in milk cans, and they had a milk thing cooler there, and then the truck come and got the cans. I guess, I don't know, I guess maybe it went down to Springfield or somewhere. At that time, there was several small milk plants around Brattleboro. And then the bulk tank come in with a lot of other regulations. And, you can't have cows on a wooden floor. And so that changed everything. You used to have cows on a wooden floor, and you just open up the scuttle, and then you put the manure down below, and then you had to fork it out in the next year, in the spring. It's all handwork. So moving ahead a little bit more, they had to consolidate all the cows over there. So they rebuilt the barn so they could put the cattle on cement. And regulations had a lot to do with what took place on the farm. You had milk inspectors that come around pretty regular. Some were pretty nice, others were a little different. No matter which one you had, he could always find something wrong. You'd always want to leave something out of place so he could have something to write up about. But that, which is probably good. Let's see. Yeah, that everybody had a job. Everybody had some outside work. I think at one time, and I can't remember, I was quite young, my father and my Uncle Emery, they sold garden tractors there, Waterbury garden tractors. I don't know whether there's any of them around now or not, but I know that went on for a few years there. They sold quite a few of them. There was a little thing with a motor on it and the wheels there and handlebars to drive it. And then maybe about that time, they sold chainsaws. They sold precision chainsaws with I don't know, I think they're made in Canada or something, but them things probably weighed 40 pounds. I could hardly pick it up. And many times they weren't too reliable in starting. You'd lug them and get them up into the woods somewhere to do something, and then it wouldn't start, and you'd have to build a fire to keep warm and tinker on it and take it apart and put your parts on the stump and fix it, and then finally get it going. But it was the saw, you had to run it straight up and down, and then the saw was made later. So you could, when you wanted to cut this way, you turned the carburetor up, and that was an improvement. And this was before the more modern day saws come about. We still have, my wife and I, we still have parts of old saws there, but they're way in the backside of the shed right now, resting. So that's probably some of my memories. There's probably a lot of other stuff that I haven't mentioned, but that's probably pretty much it right now.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you. So Harry Evans Farm on Weatherhead Hollow. If you're heading down Guilford Center, make that right, and you'll see and you probably see the sugar buckets are still up, still sugaring with buckets along the Broad Brook there. That's the Evans sugaring operation. I always want to watch for when those buckets go up. That's my signal, and when they go down too. Maybe we'll mosey down Weatherhead Hollow a bit and see if David has a thought. David Franklin Farm. Thank you, David, for being out. If you've seen a tractor with lights on at night riding around haying and after dark, that's probably David. So, yeah.
I try not to. So my family's only been here since the 1760s. But we originally landed up by Sweet Pond, which was then known as Franklin Pond, built by one of my ancestors. But we moved around town, and finally I landed where I am in 1984. So I've just been there 40 years. But we started out, we've farmed all over town. So, when I started farming there in 1984, I was a conventional dairy farmer. I wanted nothing to do with the woods. I just was going to make some milk I was 24 years old and I was gung ho. And there was 10 farms in town shipping milk at that time. And right now there's 2. There's me and there's a kid much younger than me, Tim Clark. He's 25 days younger than me, and our sons. And I started out as a conventional dairy farmer, and I was going to Greenfield, Mass, picking up growing corn, and I was growing at the Welcome Center, which is 10 miles this way. And in 1992, the price of milk took a nosedive, and my equipment was worn out, and I was starting a young family, and I could have the corn delivered cheaper than I could grow it myself. So I gave up all the hayland that I used to use all over town and just went to purchase feed. We've evolved a lot. Since 1992, we haven't put any commercial fertilizer on our property. We haven't used any pesticides, herbicides. We've been organic since 2004. And my wife was absolutely instrumental in getting the organic truck in here. We went through some pretty hard times, but it's rewarding to see my son wanting to farm, and I looked into selling the development rights, and I have to withhold 50 feet each side of every brook on my property. I have to let it grow up to brush. It's the most productive land I have. This one stream that most of the year will run through a 4-inch pipe, but I have to treat it like it's the Mississippi River, and there's no give on it from Vermont Land Trust. It's very frustrating, but it's a no-brainer because about half of the pasture that I use wouldn't be able to be used. So it's been challenging, but we're still there. We do organic beef. We have, if you see the Black Angus cattle out at the end of Weatherhead Hollow Road, those are ours. We sell organic grass-fed beef. We sell maple syrup. We have our little farm store. And the biggest thing I've seen in my lifetime is the reduction of the consumer dollar that the farmer gets. We were told, as for years we've talked about raising the price of milk in the store to people, make them pay what it costs you to make it. Well, it can be made cheaper and trucked in here than we can do it in our area. So we're still challenged with that, but that's why we diversified. We do our maple syrup. It's that we sell right there on the farm mostly. We do some internet sales, but mostly there at the farm. And I'm happy to been there for 40 years. It's but I'm tired.
Thank you, David. I'm going to turn to Meggie Stoltzman, who is the Hermit Thrush Homestead. Now, if you've driven out Green River Road or go out Heinsberg Road, and then as it turns into Green River again, you'll pass the Hermit Thrush, our state bird, Hermit Thrush Homestead. And I'm really happy Meggie could join us because this is a new generation of people making a livelihood from the land. So thank you for coming out and sharing any thoughts you have.
Sure. I'll stand up too. I'm semi-able-bodied. Yeah, so I farm about 2 acres of diversified vegetables and raise laying hens. And I've been doing that since, we moved here in 2010. So it's such a short history compared to this longevity. But I love hearing the challenges that you talk about with farming, because I feel like whenever someone doesn't talk about the challenges of farming, I feel like they don't really farm, or they must do something else to make their money, because it's the craziest way to make a living these days. It seems like maybe historically there was it was less crazy, or everyone was just forced to do it. And it's so interesting to hear that greater context about westward expansionism, because I feel like, with dairy and with vegetables, even though I'm a tiny farm and I'm marketing everything locally, I'm in competition with big ag in California, because that's what's in the grocery stores. When I don't have something in my own kitchen, I'm buying stuff sometimes from other giant mega farms. So it's a real thing that is still like very much a part of agriculture and shaping the way that farms can exist in a little community like this, where we really just don't have much really good farmland. And it's very expensive. I mean, so I farm mostly on my neighbor's land, which they amazingly let me farm for free. And that's been wonderful, and really the only reason that I have been able to farm here. I'm slowly trying to transition some crops to my own land, mostly because I have no long-term rights on my neighbor's land. And that's something that I'm working towards, so that I hopefully can keep farming even when I am possibly not going to be able to farm where I do now. But I think the driving force for most farmers is really like this for me anyways, it's this obsession with like working with the land, being outside, having this really intimate connection with our sustenance. And even though there's always new challenges like this stupid knee injury and just, there's always something that is getting in your way. But I think, last year I took time off from the farm. I kind of farmed part-time after many years of feeling like so burnt out by the fall. Feeling like I had to take a step back. And then after a year of farming part-time, I was like, got to get back to it. And I think that's a lot of farmers, it's like, it's this love-hate back and forth of feeling drawn to it. And then you're so stressed and bogged down by your farm. But that seems to be just the way it is. I mean, I'm amazed whenever I talk to someone who doesn't have that perspective, I'm impressed and also a little suspect. Anyways,
Thank you.
Thanks.
There's a little undercurrent here. Support your local farmers, right? I mean, if you want to have food grown in our community, take a look at where it's coming from, right? And actually, what Meggie was just saying reminded me, and I'll pass it to Phil Cutting, but I was looking at Tara Cheney's, was sort of who's Phil's daughter and also a select board here in Guilford, was kind of writing up about the 100th anniversary of the Cutting Farm, which was May 8th. I think Sharon was saying there's like a deed or something on the wall, or there's a picture of the deed. But she wrote I always grew up knowing that farming is the hardest way of life I've ever seen it. I've seen it. However, I am so blessed that my roots are of this land. My best memories are in the Guilford woods, fearless, climbing waterfalls, making woodland and hayloft forts, riding horses, training cows, scraping bark, feeding animals, sugaring, and spying. Well, I can ask Tara what she was spying on. But anyway, so, I think that if we think about the families that lived on these farms, the experiences of the children and the next generations having that connection to land as well. So Phil, I don't know if I can lean on you if you have anything to offer.
I'd like to thank Mr. Allbee for a nice presentation, Roger, and Chuck and Mary and whoever else organized this event. I'd like to say I'm grateful to my grandparents, my parents. My grandfather passed away pretty young, and one of my good memories was my dad and I every day around 4 o'clock we'd go up to my grandma's and have cake or pie, or she baked something every day. I remember she used to put an X on President Nixon, but she liked Kennedy, John Kennedy. And I'm also grateful to my parents and my Uncle Clay and his family, and all the friends and family that have helped me over the years. A lot of good memories. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's open up. It could be a question for Roger, or I think we hope we could impress some of our local tillers of the soil to speak. Any questions? I'm going to run the mic around just so we capture this for posterity, if you will. But any questions for Roger or for some of our local farmers here?
So I was sort of curious. I'm glad that you mentioned Nixon, but for Roger, I grew up in Ohio, and my mother was a dairy farm daughter from Western New York, and so she was very attuned to farming, even though she gardened big time, but didn't farm. But I saw huge changes come about Ohio farming with the Nixon administration. And I can't remember now the Secretary of Agriculture. Earl Butz. Yes, thank you.
Get out. Yeah.
But you didn't really mention that transition of farming. And I just wondered if it had as big an impact in Vermont as it did in Ohio, because it was huge. It separated the crops from the animals. And, we no longer saw pigs. We no longer saw as many dairy farms or beef. And we saw huge fields of corn and soybeans. And the barns burned and fell down.
Well, I could give you a real history beyond what David has said about their dairy pricing system in the United States and when it was begun and everything else. In the beginning, prior to 1933, actually, George Aiken, when he was governor, even before that, they felt that Vermont could be the Denmark of the United States and have specialty products and market specialty products, butter and cheese and other things. But he quickly found out, as others did, that because of the Commerce Clause of the United States, we had no ability to stop other products coming into the state of Vermont. The pricing system, actually, the commodity pricing system, David, that you were part of one time, started in 1933 and then was adjusted in 1938. The Dairy Price Support Program goes way back, and it hasn't been changed a terrible amount since that time. It's been amended and talked about and all that, but it's the market order commodity pricing system. In what's happened over a period of time, Earl Butz is a good example, because Earl Butz, what happened was the Russians came in and bought a lot of our grain because they had a system where they didn't have good production. Remember their 5-year plans that they used to go by? They didn't have, so they came in and bought a lot of the U.S. grain, and Butz saw that as an opportunity for the U.S. to be an exporter of grain in the world. And so he said, besides telling jokes, he was noted for his jokes, many of them off color, of course. But he said, get big or get out. Get big or get out. That's what you need to do. And if you follow the commodity pricing system of dairy over a long period of time, it's gone through booms and busts and everything else that you want to talk about. And today, I'll give you a little bit of statistics. 60% of the dairy production in this country is by farms over 2,500 cows. Consolidation is still taking place. We don't have any local farm-based headquarters co-ops in Vermont, dairy co-ops anymore. It's good you work with Organic Valley, but they're not Vermont-based. You do. You get a say, which is wonderful. But even Cabot, which Cabot went bankrupt in 1985, basically, and Agrimark bought them out and built the brand. And they've done a good job marketing their cheese and stuff. But the price of milk today is influenced so much by consolidation, and you have to be the lowest cost producer almost in the United States because of the way it works. And it's lucky that David is selling and doing other things besides dairy, but Organic Valley, you wouldn't be here if you weren't. But if you're in the commodity dairy production, it's a terrible, terrible, risky, hard thing to do in Vermont. When I was up there, we had 1,100 dairy farms, and we studied all aspects of it. And today, I think there's 440 dairy farms in Vermont. No, 400.
Another question or?
Sorry, I'm just going to make a quick comment. Thank you for your presentation, all of you. And Mr. Allbee mentioned that he thought there were 2 legislators in the state legislature right now. And I actually serve on the state legislature, and I'm on the agriculture committee, and there are 8 members, and 4 of them are actually farmers. We have an apple farmer, a dairy farmer, a vegetable farmer, and a sheep farmer. Okay. And actually, I do believe, I believe that I actually represent Mr. You still live in Brookline? Okay. All right. Well, I'm not his representative then, but I do my best to represent the rural areas. It's absolutely true what you said about reapportionment, losing the voice in the rural communities. But there are actually a lot of people in the legislature who are from rural communities, and I count myself in that, coming from the big town of Westminster, who really do try to advocate for both farmers and for people in the rural communities, because we have really different things going on than what happens even in Brattleboro or Rutland or something like that. But yeah, we do have 4 active farmers in the legislature.
Yeah, my then husband and I were at Marlborough College in the 1960s. We were back to the Landers and followed the Nearings up to Maine because we didn't feel like we could afford the land, because the tourism industry had gotten so extensive in Vermont. But we went into the extension office up in Maine and said we wanted to raise, farm organically, and they laughed us out of the place. And I just think it's really wonderful to see what organic production has done for all of New England and, all over the states now. So it's really good to hear.
Hi. I feel so lucky to know the farmers, in Guilford, and to have crossed paths with them and their kids. Something that hasn't come up is the consolidation of huge dairy farms in the northern part of Vermont and the migrant farm workers who are living there, and the danger, especially now, to the farm workers who are housed on those farms. And I wonder if you could just comment on your perspective on that.
So does this work? It's not only in Vermont, but across the country. I call them guest workers. Guest workers are important to our whole food supply. 23% of our food supply passes through the hands of guest workers in this country. 23% or so. And our dairy industry, of course, as well as our vegetable, H2A is on the vegetable side. They come in from on a seasonal worker permit. But on the other side, they're guest workers on these dairy farms. And National Milk Producers Cooperative in Washington did a study with Texas, one of the universities in Texas, and they said if the guest workers on our dairy farms are eliminated, that the price of milk will double in the United States. That was a study by Texas. You could debate it, but they're very important. When I was in Montpelier, we were part of a group called the National Ag Commissioners Coalition, or whatever they call them, and 3 of us were asked to go to Washington to meet with the Ag Secretary and the top lawyer. And early one morning, I remember 7 o'clock in the morning, went down there, and we said to him, these guest workers are very important, and this needs to be settled. There's ways to settle it. They've been on the table for a long time, how to settle the situation to make them so that they can be here. You can make them like H2A program, seasonal, years around. That's been proposed. And I remember the Secretary of Agriculture meeting with us 7 o'clock in the morning, and he said, gentlemen, he said, yes, you're right. This is very important. We've been meeting with people on both sides of the aisle. This was 2009. Both sides of the aisle, and people recognize it needs to be settled. They're important to our agriculture in the United States. He said, but it won't be settled until there's a crisis in this country. 2009. But if they eliminated guest workers, your price of food would go up very significantly. And they need to be treated right. I would meet every about 6 months with the Mexican Council General from Boston, and we would talk about Mexico and labor there and how they need to provide labor and all that. People don't want to. Just a quick story, if I can. There's a good-sized dairy farm down in Bridport, Vermont, and the Audette family. I don't know if you know them. Very good farmers, fairly good size operation today. And she called me one day and she said, Roger, can you come down? And I said, certainly. What's the issue? She said, well, Senator Leahy is coming by and we want to talk to him about guest workers and farm labor. And I said, certainly, I'll come down. So, not Leahy, Bernie Sanders, excuse me. So Bernie showed up and she said to him, Senator, I just want to tell you, we advertise in the Burlington Free Press. We advertise in the Bridport paper. We offer good wages. We offer housing. We give them time off. We treat them well. And we can't find people to do the work on the farm. Is that right, David?
Thank you. So I know that being part of a farm family is very intimate and very special. And I have a two-part question for David and Phil, who both farmed with family members. Phil farmed with his uncle and his father, Harvey. David is farming with his son. My husband, Fred Cheney, farmed with his father until 2000. And I know that sometimes farmers can be set in their ways when they get older. And things change. So my question is, how has technology and advancement changed in your relationship with your father and your son? Like, I remember you put in a pipeline milker, and I want to know how Harvey, what his opinion was about that. Second part is, what are the advantages and disadvantages and challenges of converting to organic?
Well, my father's always pretty open to any changes. He pretty much let me decide mostly. And switching to organic wasn't too difficult. We hadn't used fertilizer for a couple of years. It got so expensive, and I don't know, it wasn't that difficult to switch over. I think, yeah. You still didn't get rich.
Work
a little harder, maybe.
Yeah.
I think it was a little more difficult for me to switch to organic because I was the first one in the area to do it. The milk company said we need a load of milk to come. The farmer said we're not switching till the truck comes, and there we were. We spent 18 months in our last 6 months of transition, and it was expensive as hell. And but we were persistent. We wouldn't go back. And then the thing that finally allowed us to get organic was H.P. Hood said there's money being made in organic, so we want it. And so they decided to go into organic. So there was more competition in the state. And at that same time, Organic Valley was getting milk processed in Connecticut. So they were coming down 91. So we jumped in our car and we found that out. We went from exit 1 to Grainfield, and then we went the back way past my farm, and it was less than a mile difference. So, my wife was on the phone every month begging them to come get our milk. So we had a meeting, and as far as the land, we hadn't used any chemical fertilizers for 10 years. The other thing was there was no organic feed available in this area. So suddenly we had to come up with enough feed for our cows, and what we didn't couldn't grow ourselves, we had to buy from up north. We trucked a lot of hay down from Westfield, Vermont, up at Jack Lazer's place. And fortunately for us, my dad's cousin had an 18-wheeler and a flatbed, and he hauled them cheap. Otherwise, that didn't, it wasn't, we jumped in with both feet because we couldn't take the roller coaster ride of the conventional market. And my wife went to some meetings of the Organic Valley people, farmers, and she said, they're happy farmers. They're making a living. And it's good to get to a group of farmers that are actually smiling. And they still do most of the time. We've been through some challenges the last 5 years, but the co-op is getting back on better feet. With some of the rule changes in 2016 and 17, there got to be a glut of organic milk, and it took a while to get the supply and demand matched back up, but it's come around, and now there's a shortage of organic milk, which is good because I just heard today that we're getting a $2 increase for this month, so that helps. But yeah, it's been very challenging, but it was challenging taking that roller coaster ride when you never knew what you were going to get when the milk check came. And it didn't matter to the co-op. I was an Agrimark member, and I went to a meeting, and they said they were losing X many farms a year, and I said, doesn't that bother you? And they said, well, as long as we have X number of dollars of milk, we'll be okay. And it's like, you don't give a damn about me. And then when I got to be organic, I paid them to market my milk, and then Organic Valley paid them to market my milk, and they came back to me and said they lost money, so they were going to put a surcharge on my milk. And I'm like, I don't think so. And I switched to NFO as my handler, and I didn't figure I'd ever get my equity back out of them, but I did. They stayed in business long enough.
I was going to ask Meggie to speak to the issues around vegetable and organic certification and sort of, anyway.
Oh yeah. I have just a couple thoughts, but I'm not certified organic, though I grow organically. And I'm a member of NOFA Vermont, so I get all their info, and I follow the standards. The main reason I don't certify is because I'm not wholesaling. So there's really no advantage. It's only a greater expense for me. I know like 90% of my customers I meet or I know personally. And the other 10%, you know, they know about the farm. So there's a real direct connection, and it feels like just an unnecessary cost. I think that's true for a lot of really small farms. And it is one challenge. I did the farmers market the first few years of farming in this area. And I did find that a challenge of being in the farmers market because you're side by side with all these other vendors. Really, it's just Dutton's that's conventional, at least at that point. That was a while ago. But everyone else is organic, but only a handful are certified. And you can't show a sign saying you're organic if you're not. I say something like uncertified organic, but I don't think it's really allowed. They could probably nail me. But it's you know, I think it's a little bit designed for big ag. So I'm frustrated by it as much as I love that big ag is using organic methods. I also feel like it's designed for the mega farm to be able to pretend that they're a small farm, and I think that puts farms like me at a disadvantage because people think they're buying stuff from a small farm when they see organic at the grocery store. You know, it's miles and miles of vegetables that are all farmed by immigrant labor in California, and it gives us a lot of food, but it's not a small farm.
Maybe one more question, and then because we have a cake waiting for us downstairs. So
I just wanted to clarify, you may not know, but there is money that offsets your certification. I worked for the Organic Trade Association for 22 years. It was first based in Greenfield, then they opened an office in Brattleboro, and they have a national headquarters in DC, but they have campaigned for the USDA, and so with the farm bills and all, there has been money put aside that goes to the states for their organic farmers. You can apply for it, and I left the Organic Trade Association a couple of years ago, but basically they pay a good portion of your certification costs. You may want to look, it's cost share, and you probably can get it. Just a helpful thought.
Just ask Roger if he had any closing
Well,
thoughts.
I think the comment's been made by David and Harry and everyone else here shows how farmers have adapted to survive. Certainly, David, you're diversified beyond being a organic milk producer, and you had to do that. And Harry, you know, it's interesting. You read the history, and even on the farm I grew up on, most of the dairy farms in Vermont at one time had a sugar bush in the spring. That was their diversity of operations, and a lot of other things took place. But that diversity is
You said
coming
most
back.
dairy farms had a sugar bush.
Maple production. But, you know, local food movement is extremely important for Vermont. Vermont has a reputation today for local food, even in the organic side. It's gained that reputation. Whether it's even the spirits today are known for what they're doing. The cheeses. You know, in 1895, we had around 250 local creameries and cheese operations in the state of Vermont. Well, a lot of that is coming back. Even local milk, what some farms are doing, peddling local milk now, organic milk, and getting that into schools. So it's good to see this renaissance coming back. My fear is that some of the policies we're seeing nationally is working against this today.
And just as sort of a closing thought before we thank our speakers is that's one we're now living in the second Gilded Age. We have a local Grange. You can be a member to support policies and advocacy. Join the Guilford Historical Society. Support our local farmers and producers, and look at the amount of our food budget that leaves our community and how much can we stay. We have this wonderful food hub here in Guilford, which is, has its pickup day tomorrow. 120 households order food. A lot of it comes from our local producers. We get our Franklin beef, and we get our Hermit Thrush, and we get our other products that are made. They don't have to even leave town. They come straight here to the Broad Brook Community Center and distributed. So you could be a member of the Guilford Food Hub at the local level. So let me just close also by thanking Roger and Ann for coming over from the Brookline area. Thank you so much. And I hope you'll visit Ann and get a copy of this terrific book, and get Roger to inscribe it, and think of somebody who might enjoy this book that isn't here, and get one for them as their birthday present or whatever. And please linger and talk to our neighbors and friends, but let's adjourn to the downstairs where we have a birthday cake to celebrate the 100th birthday of the Cutting Farm. They already had a little celebration, but it was a pretty heavy-duty rainy day, if I recall. So we're going to keep celebrating. And let's thank our local toilers here and tillers of the soil. David Franklin, Harry Evans, Meggie Stoltzman, Phil Cutting, thank you all for coming out.